Peace to the family. Welcome to another podcast and book club. We charge Colonialism podcast and book club. That is, if you're viewing this, make sure that you like and share the podcast. Like and share. Hey, peace. So I'm Yakimba, the moderator of We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club, and also a member of NPDM, International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, as well as the Abundance in Ujamaa movement, located in New York City. Y'all want to introduce yourself?
Peace, everyone. I am Natasha, member of the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition, and an educator, community organizer.
Peace, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series, WCC.
Yes. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and check out Frank's podcast yesterday. And he's there every Friday at 10 a.m. So make sure that you tune in to our latest discussion, or Frank's latest discussion, as well as some of the older podcasts that we have done, so you can catch up. We've covered a lot of good material, books, and so forth, and we're going to continue to do so. This is our first week covering the ISIS papers, so I'm excited about having this discussion, this reading and discussion. There's a link, Google Drive link to our books. You can click on the ISIS. You'll find the ISIS papers PDF there, so that you can read along with us. We're going to cover that book in the second half of our podcast. The ISIS papers too is like one of those conscious community starter kits. That's like one of the books when I came into the movement. We used to say, gaining knowledge itself. That was like one of the books that they give. It's like the top 10 books. It's like read Malcolm X, the ISIS papers, the destruction of Black civilization, some John Henry Clark, and so forth. So we're going to definitely get into that conversation. We usually start off with our weekly roundup. Again, appreciate everybody too that's tuning in. Make sure you like and share the podcast book club. So Frank, you want to start off with your story, and then I'll go into mine.
Yeah, my story is about Burkina Faso along with France. So Burkina Faso, as we've been following the story, have tried to kick out the French presence and also the military. So they have given a deadline for the final withdrawal of the French military from Burkina Faso. So it says, and which of course France is having a problem with it, and they are dealing with it, but hey, they got to go. So it says Burkina Faso scrapped 1961 military aid path with France. So this military assistance from France to Burkina Faso was a path that was initiated in 1961 with the colonial government, or the colonial puppet that was put into power after the assassination of Thomas Sankara. So it says Burkina Faso foreign minister advised French government that the country was renouncing the technical military assistance agreement reached in Paris on April 24, 1961, according to correspondent. So it says the accord was forged between the newly independent Republic of Upper Volta, now known as Burkina Faso, used to be called, and its long-term colonial power. And I believe this was the man that also assassinated Thomas Sankara, Blaise Compaoré. So Burkina Faso, along with the neighboring country like Mali, they all have joined. So, and France is really having a problem, and dealing with this. So, and they say both nations have been bitter by a long-term jihadi insurgency that in Burkina Faso also has killed thousands and forced more than 2 million people to flee their home. So let me just take this out. So because of that, with the presence of the French military, right, and the number of citizens of Burkina that have been killed by terrorists, and the number of Burkina that have been displaced due to the presence of terrorist activities in the country. Meanwhile, you have the presence of the French military. And the presence of the French military, I believe, was to assist the Burkina or the Malian in our area in terms of time like this, right? So since 1961, the French have been unable, all right, to provide a security for the Burkina or to even strengthen the Burkina military force along with supply. Imagine when it comes to supply or armor or vehicle, ammunition and things, I don't think France have limited supply of aid. I mean, they have it. So since 1961, they have been unable to prepare the Burkina military or the French, how they call it, the Malian or the Chadian military to encounter situation like this. All right. And since that time, the jihadi, how they call it, have been fighting nations in this region. And these nations in the region controlled by France, they have not been able to withhold or withstand the jihadi military or the jihadi forces. So, and since the introduction or the invitation of private Russian military, we have seen that they have been able to provide military assistance like aircraft, like helicopter to the French military, for example, to help fight the jihadi. Unlike the French, when they were there, they have been unable since 1961. They have been unable to provide military equipment to the French, to the Malian military or to the Burkina military. So they have seen that the French military presence in the region, is not productive. So henceforth, they have to let them go, because with the presence of the private Russian military, these people are getting supply, they are getting ammunition and helicopter to be able to fight the jihadi or the Islamic group. So it is necessary, and they took the necessary step to let France go, because at the end of the day, in fact, it was France that were using the same airspace and providing support, supply ammunition to the jihadi. So you cannot keep France in the region. So we support this decision of the Burkina.
Yeah, they're going to support whoever whatever is in their interest, or whoever is working in their interest. Like if they feel like that the jihadists can push forward their interests, they'll build a relationship with them, even if it's not on the surface. We may not know about it, just like in this case, and I think you're raising some serious contradictions that make us want to question what's happening. And so that's the thing about the colonizers' only interest at the end of the day. It's not really in the human rights or the advancement of African people. Or the colonized, why would they care about the colonized? They only care about the ability to be able to exploit the colonized so that they can build their wealth, which they have been doing. And I think like with you in this story, it raises a lot of questions to like try to figure out like what's really going on. Why wouldn't the French give the Burkina Faso military, the Malian military, why wouldn't they give them the support, the technology that is needed for them to defend and protect themselves? Because the colonizer has an interest as well in these countries. That's why they're there. So you would think that they want them to protect their interests. Is it because they think that, maybe they'll turn around and want to struggle against us and fight us? Or is it that, they just want to continue to keep things chaotic in the nations? Because if there's chaos, it's easier for them to come in and be able to control the populace. So, there's a lot of questions that could be asked in regards to like what's really going on. But I think at the end of the day, the motivation is still the same. The European wants to position themselves as the dominant force in the region, and all over Africa. I don't know, Natasha, if you wanted to add something to
that. Yeah, I think just adding to what you were saying in terms of how instability is profitable. So we know that like when we think about, for example, Thomas Sankara being assassinated in the role the French had to play, played in that, we know that they understand, you know, as colonizers, that one, when they leave the country, they want it to still operate in a way that is beneficial for them. And so if Thomas Sankara was allowed to continue to build the country up in a way that was actually going to serve Burkina Faso, then that was not going to be profitable for them. So for them, what was more profitable, obviously, was to assassinate him, have some other person that completely had no regard for the country's well-being and the people's well-being be in power. And that would also allow for the instability to be in the country, which then would allow for them to come in with the military. You know, we realize and we see how in all African countries, I mean, and not all of them, but like in many African countries, also in the Caribbean and South America, the European military systems are always there, ready and willing to come in to quote unquote help. And we know that they always never help. And like you were saying before, they always take the side of whoever is going to be profitable to them as a, you know, colonizer. So it doesn't matter if that person is going to you know, bring the country down, if they're going to abuse the people, if they're going to abuse, it doesn't matter as long as they can profit from it. And I think that's key, because even when you think about like the military industrial complex and how the United States and France and Britain, they run on militarism, having a huge military, creating mass, you know, mass amounts of war weapons, and needing also a place to send those weapons, a place to sell those weapons. And so to be able to send your military into places that that you've helped to destabilize and help to continue to destabilize allows you to continue to make the profit that is always part, but what is, you know, behind colonialism, right, is this never ending profit that is unsatiable. And I think also when we think about African countries, and I had been learning, like, you know, in the fall and in the early winter, just about the way some African countries have began to say, okay, we need to look back at ways that are indigenous to African people of solving conflict. We can't think that these Europeans' ideas of how we're going to solve these conflicts are going to work, because it's been proven, as Frank has even pointed out, this is from since 1961. You have the French military there, and it hasn't solved anything. And so we have the same people who have colonized, who are profiting off of the instability, being the ones who say, oh, this is the answer, this is how we will help you, as opposed to us deciding, okay, well, this is the answer, this is how we want to resolve this conflict, and then we can tell you where and when we would want whatever it is that we feel we need, and that is aligned with the way that we're going to resolve these conflicts. So I think like that's also like a really important thing for us to start to think about as African people here in America, but also on the continent, in terms of, okay, we know that we have all of this conflict that's left over from like colonialism that was, you know, in the 1800s and, you know, early to mid 1900s. How do we begin to resolve these conflicts in a way that allows us to not have to depend on European countries, but also uses the ways in which, and taps back into the ways in which we were doing conflict resolution amongst ourselves that worked?
Yeah, you know, just building off of what you're saying, it just makes me think about this dependency, right? Like the only reason that Africans are still dealing with these colonizers, a group of people, I mean, they've come to your nations, enslave, you know, abduct Africans, enslave Africans, colonize Africans. Why do we still maintain this relationship with these people, even with all that being said? It's because we're tied to this economic system. And you know, kind of ties back in, it's going to tie into my story in regards to state capture. But it's this, you know, relationship that I think has to be severed, man. It's this continued dependency on these nations for technology, for military support. You know, what else is it? I mean, for businesses, the companies, this is the other part, the companies that are there in Africa that are coming from foreign places, whether it's from the Middle East, whether it's from Asia or Europe or America, these companies that are there and making money. So the state has, the foreign state, the colonizers have an interest in these countries because they have business interests there. So, I mean, it's a whole, takeover, dismantling, I think, of this relationship and system. That's what it's going to take for Africans to really liberate themselves. Frank, do you want to add anything before I move into my story? Is going to kind of tie in.
Yeah, let me just add 1 or 2 minute addition to it. And again, this go back to the 1960s, because that was the time most African nations started getting independent. It should also remind us that in the 60s, when most of Africa started getting independent, what happened here is, before the colonizer left, they were destroying everything that they built. And the reason why they were destroying them, they were burning them, they were breaking them down, there was a reason. Because it's like, before they leave, they burn them down, they break them down, right? Now, without their presence, we will have to go back to them, because we will need those same material that they burn down, they break down. We will need them in order to build back our nation or our economy. So in turn, we will have to go back to them to give us support. And in doing that, we will depend on them. And this is where most of independent Africa was stuck, because they have to go back to the same people they get independent from after things were destroyed, after things were burned down. They have to go back to them for financial support, for whatsoever support that they can get from them to build back what they destroy. And in doing that, there were conditions put on the table for them so that the presence of the colonizer will still remain in Africa. And that is what today France and its colonial allies, they are still doing, like what the United States just did to Uganda, as I reported on it yesterday. And that is what France is doing, because they are kicking out the French presence, or the French presence in Burkina Faso, or like Mali. They are kicking them out. That is the reason why the French, with the colonial policy, what they did in the 60s, they are doing the same thing to support the terrorists. So if they are giving support ammunition to the terrorists, that means the Burkinabe army or the Malian army will not be in a position to fight the terrorists. What will then happen here is they have to go back to France and appeal to France and apologize to France for France to come back again with support in order to be able to fight the jihadi. But meanwhile, it is the same France that is supporting the jihadi, giving them ammunition, as it was already reported. And this report was given to the United Nations that the French army, they are using the Malian airspace and supporting the terrorists. What did UN do? UN went in still to solve the problem, but they start blaming Mali, that it is Mali or the army of Mali that is rather killing the citizen. So they are all working together. So this is what happened in the 60s when we were getting independent. And again, in 2022 to 2023, the same occurrence is happening. As we are kicking them out, they are supporting the terrorists so that the terrorists will end up defeating us. And if we cannot defeat the terrorists, we will end up going back to the colonial master to come back to help us.
Man, serious contradiction. Yes. I appreciate you raising that. And that's why it's important for us to be like conscious of these events and what's taking place and why it's taking place, so we can come up with the proper solution, and always think, from a African centered perspective. We got to center ourselves when making these decisions. So the story that you mentioned, Uganda, which sort of ties into what I'm talking about, or at least what put me on the path of what I'm going to discuss, which I would advise you guys to just like maybe get a pen and paper and write down some of this stuff, because I can't really go into it. It's just not enough time. So I was looking into, one of the things that I do in my research is look at some of the companies, or look at these companies that are in African nations that are exploiting African people, that is dominating the economy. And looking at Uganda and some of the major, the biggest companies over there, because this is neocolonialism. What we're talking about, like neocolonialism is not just, Black power and white face. I think also neocolonialism is like these companies who are in these nations that are able to. So even though the state don't necessarily have direct political control, but their businesses, they're able to send private industries in these places to be able to dominate the economy, and that benefits those Western nations. So two of the top companies is Uganda, MTN Uganda, and Now Breweries Limited. Breweries Limited is owned by Sad Miller. I'm sharing my screen really quick. Had to go fast. So this is just I'm just want to give you an example of just like the things that I come across that's similar to this when we're looking at these large companies in Africa. So Sad Miller was a South African multinational brewing and beverage company headquartered in Woking, England, on the outskirts of London until 2016 when it was acquired by Anheuser-Busch Corporated. So just looking at like where it's headquartered at, who owns it. Also, MTN Uganda headquarters is also in South Africa. And that was I don't have the time to bring it up, but the CEO is Mcebezi Hubert Jonas, and this is someone who he came out against the Gupta family. Stop sharing my screen. He came out against the Gupta family. That brought me to another article that is really the article that I'm covering today, but I'm just going to give you the article for you to read on your own time. But it's about state capture, and state capture I think is very important. State capture is the extension of state capture is a type of systemic political corruption in which private interests significantly influence a state's decision making process to their own advantage. I want you to look up the Gupta family. That's Gupta, and let me pull this up. The Gupta family. Share screen. Now, this particular article is talking about bad management in the public sector, legacy of state capture. So the Gupta family, which is an Indian family that was in South Africa, and basically is on the record that they had tremendous influence, not just over low-level politicians, but even the president. Is it Jacob Zuma? Zuma was the last president, right? But the Gupta family even had control at the highest level of the government. This Indian family and this is an example. And then in this article, it just talks about the legacy of state capture, as if state capture still isn't a problem. And then, as we continue to do these, have these conversations, I'm going to bring other examples of how state capture still exists, not only in occupied Tanzania, known as South Africa, but how state capture actually is embedded in the system of colonial capitalism. So state capture is talking about this relationship that the private industry has with the government, where these private companies are able to influence and control the government, right? But this relationship between the private industry and the government, the state is actually an extension of the bourgeois class. But what we have today is that there's private industries. I think when we talk about state capture, there's private industries that's able to go into Africa from these foreign nations, and they're able to gain control over the governments because of the resources that they have, because of the money that they have. And this is a new form of colonialism. Now, again, there's a lot to discuss there, but I just want y'all to look into those two companies and look at the influence that they have over the Uganda government. That's MTN, Uganda, and now breweries. And look at who founded these businesses. Most of the time, when you look at the founders, they're controlled by Europeans, sometimes Arabs, sometimes Indians, but it all goes back to the European and colonialism at the end of the day. So if you guys had something to add, I know we have like 5 minutes for this particular section.
I think one of the things that when you were talking about state capture and these private companies controlling and having major control and say within the government, and it's linked to colonialism, it reminded me about how we know that during the beginning, when we think about the beginnings of colonialism, how do these countries go in and colonize another country? Well, we know that one, they go in through the religion, through missionaries, but we know that the other thing that they do is they go in historically through companies. So when we think about even when they were colonizing India, and they went in through their own businesses in Hawaii, and we think about like Dole, I believe, was the company that helped to colonize Hawaii because of the way that it was entrenched within. When we think about Puerto Rico, all of these these companies that go into these countries, set up shop, and then start to control and have control and say over what is happening within this other country, that allows then that colonizing country to be able to maintain and grow its influence within that part. So I think it's directly tied. I mean, the link is there, and it just shows us that what they've historically done is what they're continuing to do. And we need to be paying attention to that, because really they're not changing up the strategy too much. They're just continuing on with it, and we're not paying attention.
Yeah, just really quick, Frank, like, because when you look at the history, like you said, it hasn't changed. We're going back. It's a circle, right? The colonizer continues to do the same thing. When they set up the system of colonial capitalism, what do? They set up colonies. Colonies were basically business ventures. These is business ventures where they sent at first the state would fund, and the state represents the bourgeois, the ruling class. The state at first was investing in these colonies, but it could be costly. So what did they do? They supported private industries, and they let the private companies, businesses, go over to these nations, into the Americas, into Africa, and set up businesses with the support of the state. But it was their job to be able to exploit and oppress the people locally so that they can raise money and wealth to give back to the mother country, because of the relationship that they have. One hand washes the other, but they're, both, two wings of the same bird, though, at the end of the day. And so we still have the same thing today. That's why when we have these international systems, the IMF and World Bank, and the WTO, when they're pressuring oppressed nations, African nations in particular, to change their governmental policies and open up their borders to foreign companies, it's because it's in the interest of their foreign companies to go into Africa and African communities, exploit them economically because it benefits the Western nations. What other reason do they have to do so? But sorry about that, Frank. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, it's just a continuation of what happened in the past. These people, they are always, alert on how to manipulate what they have been doing and what they are good at doing in order to favor them. And when you look at history, right, when slavery started, when colonization started, it was all about individual that went in and went onto the African continent. And then they carry on good amount of work to, for example, England. And then the Queen of England did not know about it first, but I think someone like John Hawking, when they exploited Africa, they carried the gold and mineral and things. When she saw it, and then they brought her into it. And then she began to support, because they needed her support. They needed overseas support while they are in another country. They needed the military of that country, right, of England, to support them as they go to Africa overseas and stuff. So that's how it started. Individual companies that went on the African continent, and then they carry on goods and things and supply, and they carry to Europe and into America, and these people saw it, and that's how their government began to support them while they were overseas, because they were exploiting resources and bringing it to America, how they call it, improving their economy, carrying it to Europe, improving their economy. So that's how military came in to support these companies. That's how government came in to support these companies. And it happened from that time up to today, which even from that time we saw missionary. They were not people that went on, or how they call it, to Africa, to go tell African people about, who they are in society, and so missionaries were there to tell African people that you are inferior. And that's what they were there for. You are lesser human being. Okay, missionaries were there to look down on African people. Missionaries were there to condition the mind of African people, while their military were there backing it and supporting them. And that have come into even current day society with NGO. Those NGO, they are not coming to Africa to come and support Africa or to save Africa. I mean, they might get some crumbs. The same way we have neo-colonialism, all right, where they have some black people, they give them some cash. It's the same way. They don't mind, these are non-governmental organization coming in, giving some kind of assistance or some kind of a medical assistance to African, and you think they are there giving us supply or giving us medical assistance and things, but they are there. What they are getting from there, it is more than what they are giving or in return with that medical supplies and things. And in this current time, we have these same NGO and these same missionary supported by their government in Africa, supported by their IMF in Africa, supported by the World Trade Center in Africa. They are not there in our interest. They are there in the interest of America, in the interest of Europe, and so forth and things. That is what these missionaries, that is what these organizations, these non-governmental organizations, they are in Africa for. And one thing again, we should understand here. Look, all of these nations, like I saw comment here, about India. Look, these Indians, where did they come from? They came from another place. So even if they are on the African continent, they are not looking at themselves as African. They are looking at themselves as foreigner, just how they have white people on the African continent who are foreigner. So they are also in line with those white people, because they know that white in Africa, they are foreigner. So even the India, they know that in India, they are foreigner. They came from somewhere, just how they know that white people came from somewhere. So they will prefer looking down on African the same way white look down on African, so that they can have that overseas protection, because they know in Africa, right, we cannot protect ourselves at the end of the day. Overseer military will protect them. They know that there is no military in Africa that will protect them. So there is military in America that will protect them. There is military in England that will protect them. There is military in India that will protect them. So they will prefer taking the side of the white, of the European, so that they all can be on the same page. So that, because they are all there to explore. The same way the white man is in Africa to explore African people, it is the same way Indian, even though they may have some color like us, they don't see themselves as African. They don't see themselves as black. They see themselves as different race, and they see themselves from somebody from somewhere different. So in that regard, I think we should stop saying, we are all black, we are all this. Look, as long as these people do not recognize themselves as African, they are not part of us. We should stop looking as we are the same minority people, we are the same people with the same color. They are not seeing it that way. And we ourselves, we have to go by the same plan that they are going with.
Yeah, I say. So we appreciate too everybody that has been tuning in so far. Make sure that you like and share. Subscribe if you have not subscribed to We Charge Colonialism. Because part of our job is to support the international struggle against colonial capitalism, against imperialism. Right, we're working for the advancement of African people, and so we want to make sure that we're putting out the information to arm African people, not just against a physical struggle, but an ideological struggle that is taking place and has been taking place under this system. So we're going to move into our reading today. There's a link to our Google Drive where you'll have access to the ISIS papers. So we're going to begin reading the ISIS papers by Francis Cress Welsing. But before that, I just want to pull up a couple of things that are happening today that you may find interest in, that you should find interest in. Let me rephrase that. Make sure that it's sharing. So today, this is happening. You can participate in this virtually. Is my screen sharing? Might not be sharing.
It's sharing.
Oh, okay. All right. So bearing witness in the case of Mumia Abu Jamal, you can see the panel there. Gabriel Bryant, who's local organizer based here in Philadelphia, with me, part of that, moderated by Lynn Washington Jr. That's today at 2 o'clock. So from 2 to 4, it's going to be live stream, but it's happening. If you're in the area, there's the address right there, 6001 Germantown. So write that information down. You can also be able to find this information on Mumia's Instagram, or the Instagram that was created for him. So definitely write that information down if you're interested in going in person or viewing the live stream. Just want to give y'all a little time to get that information. And if you didn't get the information, you can reach out to me, and I'll give you the information. So that's happening today. So if anybody that's viewing this after today, of course, would not be able to participate. There's one more thing that's happening I wanted to uplift. Make sure I can share this. Let me hurry up. All right. So this is Operation Power, and this is at 12 o'clock, from 12 to 2 p.m. So there's a lot of information being pumped out today. The Mumia Abu Jamal has been locked up since, I think, 82. It's important that everybody gets behind the campaign to bring Mumia home. What are they doing? I mean, this is torture at this point, man. This is beyond, punishment. They're actually trying to kill this brother. I think, I'm not even going to get into everything behind it. I'm just going to leave that for 2 to 4. All right, from Mumia Abu Jamal. This is Operation Power, Black Women's Her Story Month. And so the women of Operation Power are going to be discussing these Black women. That's happening 2 to 4. It's the information right there. As a matter of fact, this is recorded, so you can always go back to this YouTube, anybody that's viewing right now, to get this information once this live recording is done. All right, so let's get into it, man. We're going to talk about Francis Cress Welsing. No, we don't have a lot of time today, but we're going to come back next week, though, to finish everything up. Just a little bit about our dear sister, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, is a psychiatrist born in Chicago on March 18th, 1935. She earned her medical degree at Howard University in 1962. She worked as a staff physician for D.C. Department of Human Services and was the clinical director of 2 schools catering to children with emotional troubles. Welsing opened her own private practice in D.C. in 1967. She sought to help bring about a solution to the mental health problems of the Black community by understanding racism. And so I think that's important, because that gives us a little understanding of her perspective and the motivation behind writing the ISIS papers right there. So Welsing published her first major work, The Cress Theory of Color-Confrontation, as an essay in 1970, and that's what we're discussing today. This particular essay, which is in her book, which is a collection of essays in the ISIS papers. So Welsing argued that the drive for white supremacy and superiority stems from a pervasive feeling of inadequacy and inferiority on the white community. So Welsing contributed her research to her not gaining tenure and losing her post at Howard. So she didn't gain tenure and she lost her post at Howard as a result, which she thinks that was a result of her position on white supremacy and racism. And so let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen and y'all can read along with this. The ISIS papers. All right, so the Cress theory of color confrontation and racism, white supremacy, a psychogenetic theory, genetic theory, and world outlook. Unlike religion, the body of knowledge known as science takes the position that all observable phenomena can be explained, or at least is grist for the mill of investigation, analysis, and understanding by the human mind. In today's very small world, at least 3/4 of the people are non-white. And the members of this non-white, I think it's more than that, and members of this non-white majority population are subjected to domination throughout their lives, either directly or indirectly, by a tiny minority of the world's people who classify themselves as white. Racism, white supremacy, then, is revealed as one of, if not the most important observable phenomena in the world today, for which social, behavioral, and all other sciences should be seeking an explanation. Heretofore, racism has been defined and described variously. Yet, in my view, the comment made by Oliver C. Cox in his 1959 award-winning text, Caste, Class, and Race, still prevails. It is not ordinarily realized that of all the great mass of writings on race relations, there is available no consistent theory of race relations. The need for such a sociological explanation is so great that recently, when one author succeeded with some degree of superficial logic in explaining the phenomena in terms of caste relations, the college textbooks and social science journals almost unanimously and unquestioningly hurriedly adopted his theory. Perhaps social and behavioral scientists have failed to develop a sound and consistent theory of racism because of the tendency to be less demanding and less stringently disciplined and sticking to observable and measurable data than the so-called physical scientists are required to be in formulating hypotheses. Frequently, contrary to all the basic premises of modern science, statements are made by some of these scientists a priori, that is to say, claimed as valid independent of observation. Similarly, society in general fails to impose a significant amount of pressure on behavioral and social scientists to yield viable theories and definitions. Such theories and definitions subsequently can stand and function as efficient and effective tools to be utilized by social engineers and guides for changing social reality. However, the contrary seems to be the case. If there is any pressure at all, it is to maintain the social status quo. And all too often, institutions of the society reward the superficial, inconsistent, and dysfunctional theories of societal dynamics. I'm gonna read because I think we're gonna spend some time discussing this. Let me read one more paragraph. Nellie Fuller, in his 1969, copyrighted the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook / workbook for thought, speech, and or action for victims of racism, white supremacy. Recognized the need for a functional statement on racism, one that could be utilized daily by those earnestly seeking to bring about social change. Fuller observed that contrary to most present thinking, there is only one functioning racism in the known world, white supremacy. He challenges his readers to identify and then to demonstrate the superiority or functional supremacy of any of the world's non-white peoples over anyone. Concluding that since there is no operational supremacy of any colored people, Fuller reveals that the only valid operational definition of racism is white supremacy. He observes that in spite of any and all statements the world's non-white peoples may make about themselves having economic and or political independence and the like, in the final analysis, they are all victims of the white supremacy process. He places major emphasis on the present realities of the world that can be verified and tested rather than on what one can imagine to be the case such as a black or yellow supremacy. He further emphasizes that instead of focusing on the individual cases or on specific locations, a perspective that examines the patterns of relationships between whites and non-whites worldwide must be developed. Right? I think they're really about to go into it too, but I don't want to get too far from what we read because a lot, I think, was said. This was written in 1970, as it says right here. I think it was published in a journal in 1974 later on, but I think that's important too, just the time frame, because the argument in regards to the need for a working definition for racism, I think that she was making at this time. There's a lot of people who took on that challenge. I mean, Naeem Akbar, Dr. Bobby Wright, I think Amos and Wilson. I think in the 80s, you're going to see, particularly probably at this time, you'll begin to see more throughout the 70s, I should say, in the 80s, when we began to view the world from an African-centered perspective, at least some of our, great African-centered scholars. And so I think it's important to look at this in the context as well. But even to the other argument, and I'll open it up to you two. I like how she brings Neely Fuller into this and his, work and definition of racism. And Fuller talks about racism not just being an individual practice or an institutional practice. And they are individual and institutional practices. But he said it's an operating system. And I think once we understand it's an operating system, this argument of who can be racist and who cannot be racist and all of that, we could throw that all out the window and understand that, under a system that's politically, economically dominated by the European world, I don't care who else, man, is able to acquire wealth. That's my position. Who else is able to acquire wealth or power? All of that, relative to the European in this world is, I think is at an inferior position. It's in the least favored position. The dominant position is controlled by the European. I mean, even people who are not European will classify themselves as white, and enable so that they can be able to take advantage of white supremacy. In America in particular, you have people who come from Mexico, that come from Asia, some people who come from some of the darker nations of the world who will claim to be white on the census in order for them to benefit in a system where the position of white is the most dominant position. So I think understanding it as an operating system allows us to say, hey, it doesn't matter if it is a black person who's operating and is oppressing individually or as an institution is oppressing people of the same race or other races. They're still working in the interest of white supremacy. So I'll just leave it there to see if y'all had any.
I didn't know. I didn't know if Frank wanted to go first.
Hey, I can go. I can keep going.
No. Yeah, no, I can jump in right here. I think some of the things, if we go back to where she talks about how he places Neely Fuller, particularly going off of what you were saying too. The major emphasis on the present realities of the world that can be verified and tested rather than on what one could imagine to be the case.
Where are you reading from?
I'm on page 2, at the bottom of page 2.
Okay.
So the bottom of where, and I'll read. He says, he observes that in spite of any and all statements the world's non-white peoples may make about themselves having economic or political independence and the like, in the final analysis, they are all victims of the white supremacy process. He places major emphasis on the present realities of the world that can be verified and tested rather than on what one could imagine to be the case. So I think that what Neely Fuller does and what Frances Cress Welsing does as well is really telling us to look at the reality of what we're living. Like, let's not take a few individual people or a few individual businesses and use that to say, oh, well, then no, we there is no white supremacy, there is no system of racism, because look at these couple of people, look at this. But no, like, look at the whole of the reality, things that we can actually say, okay, let's look at everybody, like things that we can actually measure, not just an imagined idea of what our status is. And I think that the media, the way that, especially if we look at today, and this has been happening obviously since TV and advertisement were created in TV shows, but the media creates this imaginary reality for us to buy into. So when they talk about, this idea of Black excellence, or when they talk about Black progress, it always goes back to what is the media telling us about where Black people are. And so we're supposed to use the imagined stories that are created within the media, with whether they're shows or whether they're movies, whether it's the false, slanted, distorted way that news presents things, to tell us what our reality is, as opposed to us really looking at the reality of us as a whole people and seeing, okay, this is what is actually happening. And so I think that is really important in determining ways forward, what we do in terms of actionable steps that we do take. And so I really like, where he's talking about, and where she points out how he talks about really placing emphasis on the present realities of the world, that we can verify, right? As opposed to this imagined case that we're constantly being told, right? I think if you look at TV, or if you look at, media, whether it's newspapers or magazines or whatever, it's not really in mainstream, we're talking about mainstream. It's not really giving you the reality of Black people. It's giving you this imagined state so that people can feel like, okay, yeah, there's not really a racism. We just have a few problems, but we're not really operating within this system that is, operating on its own, that is operating, that white people have set it up, where now it kind of operates as a well-oiled machine, even though we know, white people have to be put in particular places and things have to be put in particular places. But we know that it's able to do that because of the type of education, right? That white supremacist education, that European, Euro-Christian mentality that you're made to look through and have, because you're educated in this particular way, so that you can help the system continue to run as it does, in the way that benefits white people. So like you were saying, it doesn't matter if you're a Black person who happens to get a job in this particular area, or if you're the vice president of a white-owned company, or like of a multinational white-owned company. It's still within the system of white supremacy. And so it still acts to benefit the system of white supremacy. And we know that our experience as Black people and other world majority people who are within the world, that our experience with white supremacy is not the same as white people's experience with white supremacy. So you can't even begin to explain what our actions or our behavior in terms of why white people do their things and behave in the ways that they do, because it's two different experiences based on the system of white supremacy that is controlled by white people.
Hey, did you want to add something, Frank, or you want?
Yeah. Let me just maybe take 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah, and what you both said, and also from what the reading says, I'm just going to build up on it, where it says racism is white supremacy, right? And then and white supremacy is operational system. So racism is white supremacy. So white supremacy came from racism, and then white supremacy now they relate that to a system, which is now operating right now. Let's just go back to Africa, and the reason why it is an operational system. And like what Natasha read down there, like, at the end of the day, some people feel that, they are not affected by this racist, attitude or behavior or whatsoever, or racist system, right? Now, and like the story again in Kuma brought out, I'm just going to incorporate everything into it with that Indian entity, or how they call it, corporation. Now, in Africa, right, these foreign companies, they might be, they may not be white, they might be operating, on different, like for example, coming from India, or coming from Lebanon, or coming from Malaysia, or coming from China, right? If they go to Africa, for example, they take advantage of the operational system of racism or of white supremacy in Africa, right? So they take advantage of that system, because in Africa, that system does not recognize Black people, or it does not recognize African people. All right, especially in places like South Africa. We know who operate on South Africa, who owns South Africa, who controls South Africa. So even if an Indian company going to Africa, they are not going to go on the side of the indigenous people or on the side of the Black South African. What they're going to do is they're going to take advantage of the system of white supremacy operating in South Africa, because the system of white supremacy in South Africa controls South Africa. So if they go with Black South African, their organization will not operate. Their system will not operate or function. They will not succeed. So they have to go and take advantage of the system by insulting or by carrying on that racist behavior against African people, even though their color look Black, but they have to take advantage of the system to in order for their business to operate in South Africa. But when they travel out of South Africa, now it also affects them when they come to America. When they come to America, they are not going to look at them as, how they are being favored in Africa or in South Africa. They now become part of the so-called minority in America here. So that's how the system, really operate. When they describe it, it is an operational system. That's how I operate here. And for example, sometimes when I see African people in America here waking up, right, trying to do things to identify themselves, right, trying to put themselves forth, sometimes I see white supremacy saying to Black people, you are racist. That is racism. No, that is not racism. The reason why it is not racism, because I don't control the system, right, to control you or to imprison you. I'm not the one controlling the system to imprison you or to bring charges against you or to bring 4 charges against you. I'm not the one controlling the system that when I call 911 and 911 or police come, once they see you as a white, and then they shoot you or they kill you or they take you to prison or they lie on you, I'm not the one controlling the system. I'm only advising myself, right, or educating other Black people to operate as Black. And once you want to operate as Black in a white supremacy, in an operating system, then they see it as you being racist. Meanwhile, I have never done anything to change the system, right, to imprison you or to change the system to make it look bad, or to go on media to change the view of the media to say white people are this, white people are that. I have never controlled the system. I'm only educating myself. So even what we are doing here, I can tell you, they are even telling us we are racist because we are educating ourselves, but we are not the one controlling the system to influence on white people. So we are not racist.
Yeah, for real. I think like that's one of the main things that um allows us as a people to be in a state of confusion within the United States and everywhere else, because like you were saying, Frank, you can apply, what Francis Cress Welsing is talking about and what Neely Fuller is talking about And she even mentions it in the book that white supremacy is a worldwide system. Like it applies everywhere. And you can't separate white supremacy and colonialism. They are one in this, like in the same, like you need white supremacy in order for you to be a colonial power, in order for you to have colonialism work in the way that it did. The reason why Europeans, when we think about, Europeans went out into these to colonize other places because they wanted the resources, but also because they had the idea that white people are so supreme above everybody else that they can go anywhere that they want and completely ignore the people who are already there and the other cultures that are there. And so you need white supremacy to have colonialism, right? And and colonialism, the system of colonialism supports white supremacy. So they're so intertwined that there's no separating them. They work at the same time. And so I think it's really important too for us to think beyond. Like what I was saying before, we're so confused because we don't understand it as a system. So we're unable to think beyond, like, okay, this is not racism doesn't exist because in my particular experience, I haven't seen this particular thing, as opposed to really growing our understanding and seeing that it's a worldwide system. And it's real ties and links to colonialism. Even here, when we think about America, like you have the doctrine of discovery that Europe created in order to say, look, where you go and you find a land that's yours, you can do whatever you want with the land and the people. And that's key to white supremacy, because even when you look at places in Africa and places in the US, when we think about gentrification, or what is really ethnic cleansing, that still operates in the same way. Okay, well, white people are so supreme that it doesn't matter if you have a whole community in Brooklyn or Philadelphia or in Chicago and Detroit. We can just go in, buy up the places, and push you out. It's the same continuous white supremacist colonial mentality in every single area. So I think that's the other thing that that is important to point out, is that white supremacy is a global system that allows white people to say they and lay claim to any part of the world that they want to, because they are white. And and therefore that, and when we're talking about, when you, Brother Akimba and Frank, were talking about how other people who are Indians or Asians vie to be in that position. They want to be in that position because they want to be able to say, okay, well, the benefits that come with ignoring and killing and pillaging and terrorizing and other people on the land, I want those benefits. And I could only get those benefits through adopting a white identity, or a parallel white identity, so that I can get those same benefits. But also, I think when we even go back to Bobby E. Wright, even the idea that you as a white people can have the ability to just go anywhere and completely do anything you want with the land and the people, as if they are not people and the land isn't real, goes back to Bobby E. Wright's psychopathic personality. And I think that when Frances Cress Welsing pointing all these things out as she goes further in the book, even ties back to this idea of like theories that are superficial and don't really get to the heart of what white supremacy is and what white people are doing, are often like the ones accepted, as opposed to ones like these where you really have to think beyond, and it allows you to get a better grounding in what reality is, are the ones that are dismissed.
Yeah, the psychopathic personality, man. Like that, it's so important to understand. I think the culture that has been created, right, is anti-black, anti-African. And they've been able to thrive off of this anti-African ideology. Race itself is an ideology. But I think like what Dr. Welsing's going to get into, though, is connecting this ideology to something that is actually biological. We're going to get into it, but yeah, it's important discussion to have, man. I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in. Frank, did you have any last words?
No, I'm good. We good.
Yeah, man, I think there was a lot of powerful points that has been raised. I love these discussions, man. Like we really getting into it. I think it's important for us to understand the enemy, the way the enemy thinks, because even the unconscious, when we're talking about operating system and we're talking about racism and white supremacy, these ideas, systems, and institutions, uh, they're impacting our very existence as African people and our ability to be able to, to be self-determined. We're locked into this relationship. And I think you talked about, Natasha, just the African who, I mean, Dr. Emerson Wilson talks about it, the African consciousness. What is it? The falsification of African consciousness, right? And so we're walking around, with this false consciousness, not even thinking about the assault that the system itself, the Europeans who's at the helm of the system, the assault that's being waged on the African psychology and the African body, most people. And that's why these conversations are important, because we're trying to bring awareness to this actual reality that we're a part of. So all of the problems that we see within society as it pertains to the African people, when we talk about the music, we talk about the videos, when we talking about the way Black people are acting and so forth, all that is a direct result of a relationship that we have with the colonizer. And until we're able to see that, I don't think we're going to be able to overturn the system. And so, again, I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in, being a part of this conversation. We're going to be back here next week, 10 a.m., to continue to discuss the ISIS papers. I want anyone out there who hasn't subscribed to our channel, make sure you subscribe now and make sure you like and share so we can get more and more people involved in these topics and conversations. Also, another way to support us is to become a Patreon member. Become a Patreon member, support us so that we can continue to do this. Well, we're going to do it regardless, man. But, that's a way to support us so that we can invest more into the podcast, into more media that's being put out there. So that's the way to support this movement, is becoming a Patreon member. So with that being said, man, appreciate you all. I'm wearing two hats today, so I'm gonna close this out. But again, peace. Thank you all for tuning in.